It's Thursday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We've got Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. How big should the Steelers be in the NFL trade market that seems to get bigger and bigger as the offseason continues? We'll talk about that, answer a mailbag question on the cornerback room, and get our Stars and Skulls grades, season grades on the cornerbacks, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. That's, of course, at Prize Picks. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders, who, by the way, right now, you might not be able to tell, but this man is in Nolens right now, covering Super Bowl week, doing the hard, heavy lifting work from the Pittsburgh and getting us all of those takes. You know, I didn't have this on the docket to talk about, Alan, but you talked to Kenny Pickett while you were there. What I want to get your thoughts on him. I know that people are gonna be like, he's not with the Steelers anymore. Who cares? But he's the first round pick quarterback from just a couple years ago. He's on the Eagles roster. What was your read on how Kenny Pickett was when you talked to him?
Yeah, I think, he kind of said that he regretted the way things ended with the Steelers. I'm not sure if he said that before. I think that's the first time I've heard him say it that way. I thought that was interesting. I think Kenny has to own some of what happened in Pittsburgh, and I, even from his perspective. I'm certainly, like, the Steelers didn't do everything right there either. But I think this is one of those situations where, like, everyone likes to yell and rant and rave about, like, the Steelers did this wrong and the Steelers did that wrong and Pickett did this wrong. Like, really, everybody kind of didn't do what they were supposed to do, and that's how you end up with a first-round pick being somebody else's backup in year 3. And yeah, I mean, it's good to see him. I covered Kenny a long time, since he was, I think, a junior in high school. So good to catch up. And but I thought that was interesting that that's how he phrased that.
I thought it was interesting too. I saw your headline on that, and I was like, I wanted to include that in this show. But we're not going to make this a Kenny Pickett. Will he get a Super Bowl ring show? That will be interesting if he does. I'm sure there's a lot of Pitt fans who will be celebrating.
I'd say this: the memes are going to be great when there's a picture of Kenny Pickett's hands around the Lombardi Trophy.
Oh, it's going to be terrible. No, Kenny don't need that kind of pressure. I mean, I hope he gets one for himself, but I hope that no one makes any hands jokes around the Lombardi Trophy. He's dealt with enough in his career. But let's move along here. We came here to talk Steelers. I want to talk about this trade market that's opening up in the NFL, and I talked briefly about this with Nick Farabaugh on yesterday's episode. But also, I want to make this clear to everyone watching and listening to this. For the next 4 episodes, they are going to be pre-recorded. They're always pre-recorded by a day. We are recording this on Tuesday, just for all clears. I am on vacation from Thursday to Monday. So your boy is trying to enjoy some time with friends and family and trying to take a little bit of time to reprieve, to come back, rejuice, because it's been a long season covering 3 teams. But I'm still going to make sure that there are daily episodes here. They just will be pre-recorded. If there is some bit of news that comes out and I don't address it on this show, know that is why. But I will try to get up a brief episode on any emergency situations as we go along with this. So with that being said, the Steelers haven't traded for anybody yet. Hopefully they won't before I get back. But the trade market, we do know right now, Myles Garrett's requested a trade from the Browns. Cooper Kupp has been told by the Rams that he's going to be on the trade market, and they're going to be looking for suitors. Now, I talked about this with Nick about, should the Steelers be in the market for Cooper Kupp? We kind of went back and forth like, he's 32. He hasn't played more than 12 games in the past 3 seasons. He played a lot of slot this last year. They have 2 slot receivers already. But Alan, I want to ask you, in the NFL trade market this year, how aggressive should Omar Khan and the Steelers be? Should they be big players, or should they be more stay on the more conservative side this season?
You know who I think they should trade for, Chris?
Oh, God, don't say it.
Brandon Ayuk.
Oh, no, I knew you were going to say it. Oh, he's terrible. I hate you. And the next day, and the next day. No, but go ahead. Seriously.
I mean, they should ask. I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is going to be, but they should ask. Yeah, I think that's the position that they should absolutely be active in, because it's the one position really where, I mean, quarterback too, I guess, to some extent. But like at wide receiver, there's not a lot of great options in this draft class. They have a need, and it's not that good in free agency. I feel like that, like corner, they have a need, really good free agent class, bumper crop of free agent corners, like really good. D tackle and running back, they have a need. Great draft class at both of those positions. Like you see easy ways for them to get what they need at those spots. Quarterback, I've just kind of sort of assumed that they're not going to get what they need at that position, sort of one way or the other. I mean, I guess there's like a small chance that Matt Stafford or Dak Prescott or someone like that gets traded, but like I don't think so, right? So like assuming that that's not going to happen and that those other three things look like they have a pretty clear path to me, wide receiver is the one position where they should really be harping on the trade market, because I think there are some guys that are either going to be traded or going to be released that are better than most of what's out there in the free agent market, especially after you get past T. Higgins, who I'm a little skeptical the Bengals will allow to come to Pittsburgh.
You and I have talked about that before on the show. In fact, just last week, about how the T. Higgins currently looks like he's going to be hitting the free agent market because he hasn't been franchise tagged. But the Bengals, it would be silly for them to not exercise their right to franchise tag him, and if not keep him, trade him so that they make sure they know where he's going. He doesn't end up in Pittsburgh or in Baltimore next season. I think that's a situation there. But I think I'm right with you. Wide receiver is the market I'd be looking into in trading for. Like you said, I like some of these free agent corners. I particularly like Byron Murphy. Anyone who's a longtime listener of this show remembers the days back when it was Greedy Williams and Byron Murphy. I had a big debates with my boy Tony Serene about who was the better cornerback. And I want to say, Tony, if you're listening, I won this debate. Byron Murphy's so much better. But in all seriousness, Byron Murphy's he wasn't a stellar quarterback right away, but he's turned into a very solid cornerback for the Vikings. He's hitting free agency. He's 27 years old. I think that's like one of the prime candidates that you got there. But my question to you then, Alan, is if you're looking at wide receivers to trade for, who do you think could legitimately be on the market who could be a true impact player for the Steelers? Cooper Kupp, if you think that he is the guy, that you can make that case. But, one guy that Nick and I have talked about, we didn't talk about this week, but we've talked about it before this season. Courtland Sutton was a guy the Steelers were reportedly interested in, and that I think something fell through and it kept the trade from happening. Could Courtland Sutton be a target, or is that kind of off the table now because the Broncos like what they got with Bo Nix?
I think Courtland Sutton could still be traded. I think that's definitely possible. I think there's a possibility that Cooper Kupp could be traded. Like I'm not like in love with that idea. I think a guy like Courtland Sutton is a better fit, but I think that's a possibility. There's like Deebo Samuel. Like, I mean, I think that's very realistic. Like when they signed Ayuk, it was kind of like Michael Silver does a great job of covering the 49ers, basically said like they're setting themselves up for a one or the other situation here. Mm-hmm. And, so yeah, I think he absolutely could be traded. Christian Kirk from the Jaguars. I've seen a lot of people say probably going to get cut, but I mean, he absolutely, I think if he hadn't gotten hurt, would have been a Steeler at the trade deadline. I think that is definitely a possibility. Davante Adams, another guy that like lots of people are talking about, maybe he could get cut. I think that's someone that that could be available for a trade. Kendrick Bourne from the Patriots. Like there's a bunch of guys out there that I think make some sense if you're the Steelers, especially these guys that like could get cut. If they don't have a ton of guaranteed money that's coming with them, like trade a 5th round pick just so you get them, and then you can make the deal work however you need to make the deal work. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think it does too. I look at I look at how the Steelers are trying to construct their roster right now. If you could get that veteran receiver in your room and help out, that would make a lot of sense. And there are guys like that. Sutton's just one name out there. But there, like you said, there are teams that there's always new openings in free agency. I always say this when we look at free agency in January and even February, the market changes so quickly. Like someone will get cut 2 days before, a day before free agency opens up, and then everyone's going to be like, whoa, what, this changes everything. And that's what the Steelers have to be really open to, is that possibility happening if Christian Kirk somehow became available and he was healthy enough and he was one of those guys. Those are the things the Steelers need to be wary of, and I think that that's where this is always a tricky proposition of who should they trade for, because when you're trading, you're guaranteeing that you're getting that player. If a player hits the open market, there's no guarantees that you're going to outbid other teams. But if you have a deal with a team, that's a whole different ballgame as far as making sure you get the guy that you think is going to immediately impact your room.
Yeah. And I think like the free agent class, not that great. Like, so yeah. I think there was a lot of, like, it's not just that, but yeah, like I think the alternative in this draft class, like, man, I've been doing a lot of work on the wide receivers, and like some guys that might be there in the first round. After that, like, it's a lot of question marks and undersized guys, and they've already got some undersized guys. They need, they don't need another, like Tez Johnson from Oregon was lighting it up at the Senior Bowl, and I'm like, well, this is great, but that's the last thing they need is another 150-pound wide receiver. Like,
so, I'm right with you there. Like, they need to get one of these guys. They didn't last offseason. You have money this offseason. I think it would behoove them to get one of those guys, be in the trade market, and get one of those guys. We'll see if they get active in that. They could get active. And again, who knows? Again, we are recording this on Tuesday, February 4th. So
they do that while I'm here, I'm gonna be really mad. So
I'm be so mad because I'm like, y'all had 2 whole weeks, 3 whole, however long it's been since they were eliminated from the playoffs, to sign coaches.
I got nothing on my calendar between now and the combine. Do it while I'm sitting at home.
Exactly. Not while Alan's on the road, and not while Chris is trying to be on vacation. If you do this, I will not forgive you. But anyways, I want to get to other things here. We got to get to some mailbag questions and to our stars and skulls grades on the cornerback room. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. The Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the Super Bowl unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, you can place a $5 bet and instantly win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. Super Bowl odds have been open for a bit now, and you look at where things are. The Chiefs came into the week as 1.5-point favorites to start the week out over the Philadelphia Eagles. They are still that right now. The money line's at -120 for the Chiefs. Eagles at plus 102, very even there. The over-under sits steady at 48.5 points. It dropped down from 49.5 earlier this week. Where will you put your money? Be sure to do so with FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Download the app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. He's out in New Orleans covering the Super Bowl. Alan, let's get to a question from our mailbag. We always take questions during the offseason. During the season, we have to close things down. When the offseason gets here, we get calls. We've been getting a lot of calls, so we're getting through them. We're turning through. If we don't get to your call right away, understand it's probably coming down the line here. Again, if you ever want to call and get your question on the show, call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and you can get your question on the show. Today's caller comes from Plains, Pennsylvania, a normal caller from the caller. It's Andrew. Andrew, take it away.
Hello, Chris Carter. This is Andrew Szymanski from Plains, Pennsylvania, and I'm actually wondering what your thoughts on Minkah Fitzpatrick are. I've done a little research, and looking into it, his best seasons was actually when we had 2 legitimate outside corners, at least on our roster. So do you think it's more important to find another outside corner opposite of JPJ? Or do you think it might be better that because of his cap hit to maybe trade him away and just get whatever draft capital we could get for him? Love to know what you think. Love the show. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate you calling in. As always, you can call in just like Andrew did and get your question on the show, 412-223-6644 to get on the Locked On Steelers hotline. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute. We'll get you on the show. Alan, but let's address this in two parts. First, as far as do you believe in that theory that the cornerback situation played into the reason why Minkah Fitzpatrick was less of a playmaker this year and also last year, because that would tie into it?
Yeah, I do. I don't think when you look at the way the Steelers constructed their defense, and I kind of go back to this year because it's the only year they've had like really good cornerback play in like 10. I feel like when they had Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson together, and they were really good. And I feel like they did different stuff with Minkah than they did this past year, where I just feel like they didn't trust their corners to be left alone without help. And Minkah just spent most of the year keeping a lid on it. He's just so far from the ball. And those two things go hand in hand. Like how much safety help you need and how much trust you have in your corners. And it's not just the two outside guys either. Spent half the year playing with an undrafted rookie who's 5'9". Like they obviously did not trust Beanie Bishop. And as soon as they got Cam Sutton back, they got Beanie out of the lineup, which should tell you even more how much they did not trust Beanie Bishop. And I think that goes beyond that to the point that they were being very cautious with the way they used Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now, was that smart? I don't know. I think you can take it too far. I think they probably went a little bit overboard in covering up however much of a weakness they felt like that was compared to taking away the strengths of one of their best playmakers.
I think that's certainly a really good theory, and we're going to get into that more as the offseason continues, because now this is the second season where Minkah Fitzpatrick hasn't been, at that all-pro production level as far as being a guy. And last year he was hurt for a good bit of it, and that's a factor. But I'm right with you, Alan. Like this, you look at what he was able to do in those years. He could be more aggressive. He could set up more things. But in a lot of times this year, he was backing guys up. He was kind of making sure, hey, that we can't allow this big play to happen. And look, against him all season, the most yards that were attributed to him in any game was 56 yards in a single game. Like, if it was any other game, it was like 20 yards. It was 10 yards, 18 yards, 12 yards. There was a lot of those types of games where he was that guy. And I think part of that again is because he was put in those positions. Now, sure, Minkah Fitzpatrick's getting older. He probably doesn't have the same 4.46 speed that he came out of college with, but he's still a very smart football player. He still knows how to jump those things. And I think it's just a reality of where they are as far as with their cornerback situation. It's why I've been saying I think cornerbacks a much bigger priority than people want to admit right now at the cornerback position. I know a lot of people want to believe in Cory Trice, and listen, I think Cory Trice can be fine. We're going to get to his grade on the season in the next segment, but I think Joey Porter Jr. they need to work on him to become a better cornerback. But they need to get a guy across from him that's not a question mark. That's not a big. It's a guy that you're confident that if you live him one-on-one with a really good wide receiver, you're trusting that he's going to hold that guy down, that he's not going to cost you a big play or a big penalty, and then you can get back to being aggressive, not just with Minkah Fitzpatrick, but with the whole defense, with blitzing, with everything else that you want to do. I do think that's an answer. And again, maybe not just at outside corner, but in the slot. Beanie Bishop made some plays for the Steelers on the season. I think that was solid. But there were times where he was a liability. And again, we'll get to that in his grade in a little bit. But I to your point, I agree with Andrew. I think it's another reason why cornerback is such an important thing for Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and Mike Tomlin to fix this offseason.
Yeah. And I think the thing about Cory Trice that's interesting to me is that you're talking about Byron Murphy. I'll throw another name out there that's in this free agent class, Deebo Samuel. These are guys that play inside and outside.
Yep.
So you can use Cory Trice as the third cornerback if you're number two, or I think those guys would probably be number one, but whatever. If one of your top two are an inside-outside guy, right? Because then on third down, you just move Samuel or Murphy into the slot, and then you bring Cory Trice out as an outside cornerback. It's not like you have to sign a guy that's going to bury Corey Trice if you don't want to. And you also have Beanie there as well as a dime corner and a smaller slot guy. If you want to, you're playing a team that doesn't have a wide receiver who's 6'2". Okay, well then we don't need Corey Trice. So I think there's lots of ways to do it that don't involve, keeping him from being able to develop as a player. I do think they like him, but yeah, I think corner in free agency feels like an absolute must at this point.
No, I'm right with you there. But that being said, okay, Alan, so let's get to the other part of Andrew's question here, and that's the question of should the Steelers trade Minkah Fitzpatrick in this situation. Now, it's funny that it was very intentional of me to time this up because yesterday's question with Nick was should they trade TJ Watt. Both he and I concluded absolutely not. Nick said that if you feel like you're not going to compete in the next 3 years, sure, but the Steelers see themselves as a team that right now they're still in the bridge mode where they're trying to fix the offensive line, build a better offense with a running look that's going to make it easier for a rookie quarterback to come in and accelerate and excel in, and then also a defense that they feel can be one of the best in football. And if you're investing in those things, you don't trade away TJ Watt the way that Myles Garrett's trying to force the Browns' hand to. And I have to kind of think that Minkah Fitzpatrick's along the same lines. He's 28. He'll be 29 next season. So that's still plenty of time to be a really good safety for the Steelers. And I know that he has a $22.23 million cap hit this next season. But I still think he's a big part of what you want to do on defense. And when you play at your best, that he's part of it.
Yeah, I don't think you get better by trading your good players away. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember like one of these deals working really well for the team that traded like Herschel Walker. Yeah, sure. If you want to go back to whatever that was, 88. Like most of the time when you trade your good player away for draft picks, you get worse. I'm not talking about even in the immediate future. I'm talking about most of the time. Like if you traded Minkah Fitzpatrick for a first-round draft pick, you don't know where they're going to be. Just anybody's first-round draft pick. Some team that could be anywhere in the draft. There's like an 80 to 90% chance that player you pick with that draft pick is going to be worse than Minkah Fitzpatrick. Not just this year, but forever. Yeah. Like it's just not. It's not like it's really hard to get better that way. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really hard to get better that way.
No, I agree. And I think that's what the situation is the Steelers. They're not in blow it up mode. And again, they're a 10-7 team this past year and the year before. They're trying to get to a point where they can be in a place where if they see that franchise quarterback in the draft, they can go up and get them. And they need to keep building to that. That's why the Rooneys aren't blowing it up right now as far as an organization. I think that there's something to that. It's what they did setting up things for Ben Roethlisberger back in the day. Ben Roethlisberger didn't walk in and was just the best player on the team. He was a really good rookie quarterback who paired with a great offensive line, of the best run game in football, really great defense, and that was enough to get them to the AFC Championship one year and win the Super Bowl the next. So if you want to get a formula that's similar like that in today's football, I still think that kind of football can win you a lot right now. Look at what it did for the Commanders, who didn't have a great offensive line. Or no, they had a good offensive line, a decent one. They ran the football pretty well, but they didn't have a great defense. They were one of the worst teams at stopping the run, and it cost them in the NFC Championship game. But look what the Commanders did with getting their quarterback. And I think that's what the Steelers are trying to get to. And to your point, you don't put yourself in the position to make that move if you trade away not just your good players, but your leaders. And that's what TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick are. They are guys that are tone setters in the locker room. They help kind of keep things there. And I know some people say, well, great, that hasn't won any playoff games. Yeah, but it's part of what's made this team a double-digit win team the last in back-to-back seasons, and why they've been on that cusp of can they just get that extra ush to be one of those better teams that can contend in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's the other part of it, is that the Steelers are too, like, when the Dolphins traded Minkah Fitzpatrick, the Dolphins were bad, and they traded their one good player who was unhappy with being there. And yeah, did they take a bath on that trade? A little bit. Sure. Like you wouldn't have rather, I don't remember who they drafted, but like you wouldn't have rather had that pick.
Something.
Yeah, for Minkah, right? But like the Steelers would have to do that like 5 times to be bad enough to draft high. Like they don't have the same benefit of a team that's like, oh, if we trade away 1 or 2 players, we could finish last and we could get the number 1 pick. Like the Steelers are like 9 of those trades away from finishing last. Like it's just not feasible.
Right. No, I'm right with you there. I don't think that that's the move, and that's why I think, hey, Andrew's asking it. It's a reasonable thing to ask. But to get it from two people who cover the team and work on this stuff every day, don't think that's the right move. I do think that the right move that Andrew, as he said, is invest in cornerback, get better there, and you'll see that Minkah Fitzpatrick production rise back up. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll grade those cornerbacks, my stars and skulls grades on the season, tallied up, and put all out there for you guys to see. That's next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I remind you, the show is also brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What do you want your 2025 story to be? Every January brings a new chapter, and now you're in February, and then you have 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's a part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist that you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolution. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft the life that you deserve. It's not just for your crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to be the best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. Even if you've never tried therapy, the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in how you navigate life's ups and downs. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's dive into these grades all season long. You were the guy for me for most of these grading days. We always did our grades like usually on Tuesdays. Where each game a player either got a neutral grade, but if they were on the positive side, they got good to great with 1 to 3 stars. Or good to elite with 1 to 3 stars. If they were on the negative side, they got bad to terrible with 1 to 3 skulls. And so that was how we did it. And then what we did was at the end of the season, like we do every year, we tally up those, and then we use that to create their final end of season grades with that. So let's get to some of these grades here. And Alan, I'm going to start off with the bottom and work our way to the top, which I think if everyone has been paying attention, who that bottom would start with in the cornerback room. Alan, can you guess who that would be?
Cam Sutton.
Right on the money, because Cam Sutton he did have 2 stars. When I went back, I actually, I think in this first game against the Commanders, and then there was one other game, he actually had a couple positive moments, and then it wasn't a complete black hole. And then he became that black hole as the season, like when he was involved in plays, he was just terrible. He tallied 11 skulls in the season with only 2 stars. Add a bus ticket to that, that's good enough to get an F on the Locked On Steelers podcast. It is a doggone shame, Alan, because Cam Sutton used to be a very good player for the Steelers. Like I would regularly give him a B on this show at the end of the season, a B+ even, because of how well he was involved. If he was the player that he was even just 2 years ago for the Steelers, the Minkah Fitzpatrick might be making more plays because he was such an asset. He was the guy that they would assign to take on number 1 wide receivers. I think that's why it's just a shame it didn't work out for him.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened there. Didn't know what happened in Detroit. Don't know what happened here, but clearly not the same guy I had been years ago. Clearly wasn't communicating on the same level as the rest of the defense, which was an issue. It was just a lot of bad there.
A lot of bad there, and why I don't expect him to be back next year after that performance. Let's work our way up here. This guy didn't see the field a whole lot, did have some plus moments, but a little bit more bad moments. James Pierre, just a fill-in guy. I gave him 2 stars in the season. He got 4 skulls, no bus tickets. He didn't really play enough to get a whole bunch of grades. He gets a C- for that, basically. But just average. But that's what you expect from James Pierre. He comes, he works hard. It's not an indictment on his effort. He's a guy that they've been bringing in to kind of bring that relief in, and he's solid for that. If he's your 4th or 5th guy, fine. But that's right where he belongs.
Yeah, I think he did a really nice job on the punt coverage team. You remember, like back in training camp, that was like such an issue where they were like, "Who's going to cover punts?" And like nobody was very good at it that they had. And then they brought Pierre back. Might have been like week 2 or week 3, And I think he did a really nice job of just locking down that role and doing a really good job over the course of the season. So, like, as a special teamer, I thought he was exactly what they needed. Now when they had him play corner, I don't think it necessarily went great. And I think they probably should have been playing Corey Trice instead. But I thought Pierre as a special teamer was great, and I'd want him back. I know he's a free agent, but, like, sign me up for another year. James Pierre as a punt gunner and a number 4 outside corner.
I hear you on that. I think that would be fine. Again, like, he's not going to cost you anything, so that's totally fine there. But I'm right with you there on that. Let's work our way up. Let's go to Beanie Bishop, who actually, I mean, I'll spoil this. He actually technically has the highest grade of the cornerback room because he also was off the field for some games when Cam Sutton returned.
He didn't play the whole last 5 games. There was a lot of skulls handed out there.
Exactly. So he wasn't part of the bad days as much. And so on the season, he had 10 stars to only 6 skulls. That's a C+ in my book. He wasn't stellar. And I mean, I want to point out, like, look, there were some games where, like, you could tell, oh boy, he's still got a ways to go before he's an NFL starting slot cornerback. But I mean, he had 3 interceptions on the season, made some plays, was tough, was gritty. There's times that, like, hey, just you're a smaller player, you're a rookie, you're gonna get beaten certain points. But I think the Steelers, like, you're happy with what you got out of Beanie Bishop, an undrafted guy who came in, was gritty for you and gave you a hard effort. I mean, C+ for an undrafted guy, that's a pretty good season.
4 interceptions. 4 2 in one game
Missed
against
one.
Aaron Rodgers, and then he had one against the Giants, one against the Bengals.
I always forget the Giants one. I remember the Bengals one.
Yeah. I thought Beanie was better than Cam Sutton, and I think they probably should have played Beanie instead once it became clear that Sutton was not going to be an upgrade. I was fine with the decision to go back to Sutton because, like we said, he had been a really good player for the Steelers recently. So I was fine with the idea of going back to him when he got off of suspension. But at some point I felt like they needed to pivot back to Beanie. It's going to look really bad. Like, what if Beanie gets a lot better and then they're going to have to wear, like, having not played him over Cam Sutton down the stretch? Like, I don't know. I think I disagree with that decision.
Yeah, I agree. And again, like, I'm right with you. During the season, it made sense to give Cam Sutton a shot, but especially when you saw him get cooked time and time again, they needed to switch out of that. It wasn't working. So that being said, let's move right along. Let's go to our next cornerback on the list, Donte Jackson. Donte Jackson, a guy who he had 9 stars, 9 skulls in the season. That averages out to just a C grade there. But I think, to be fair to Donte, this is a guy who dealt with injuries, and like that, his back injury really hampered him in the back half of the season. It doesn't change the grade overall, but I do think it kind of notes that, like, hey, like, if he's healthier, maybe he plays better down the stretch. But it shouldn't. I think people shouldn't forget how good he was at the earlier part of the season. He wasn't elite, he wasn't shut down, but he was often in the right place, and he was being a solid veteran cornerback for the Steelers, which is what they needed, and I think was a boost for them early on.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how many of these stars and how many of the skulls came before and after that injury in that second Browns game. He definitely was never the same player down the stretch. That's for sure. I thought he was pretty good early. I do think he's a guy that's just kind of, like, limited in terms of some of the things he can do. He kind of, like, pigeonholes you into some scheme things. Not great man-to-man, for example. But, like, yeah, I thought he was a good player for what they paid for him, and like, I thought he was a good acquisition. It was just, I think I think they'll probably want to move on from him and find somebody who's a little bit better fit for what they're trying to do.
I agree. And to answer your question, before that second Browns game, considering that second Browns game, he had 9 stars to 2 skulls at that point of the season.
There you go.
He got 7 skulls in the last 5 games. And again, it's not saying that he's a bad player. Just he was eaten up quite a bit during
the injury thing. Was a problem for him too. I think he's only played like 2 full seasons. So, like, if you're talking about re-signing him, that's another consideration as well.
It is another consideration that the Steelers have to take under their hat. But let's get to the number 1 cornerback on the team. And I think this is part of the problem too. When you look at the final grade here, Joey Porter Jr. on my season count, I gave him 10 stars, but also 10 skulls. And that's because he was very up and down this season. And there were times where I thought he had some great games. I thought his game against the Jets was really sharp. His game against the Chargers was really sharp. He was elite against the Ravens. He eliminated Zay Flowers in that first matchup. But then there were other games where he was just picked on for penalties, and some of the penalties were ticky-tack. I agree. Like again, in the first game against the Bengals, there was 1 or 2 of those that maybe shouldn't have gone against him. But all in all, still, Alan, he did not ascend into that being that shutdown corner, and I think he even admits that. Like if you watch that last or penultimate episode of the Hard Knocks series that Max did, and you see him talking to Grady Brown, he talks about how he needs to be that guy next year, and he needs to step up, and he acknowledges that. And I think that's a really good sign of Joey Porter Jr. that he can acknowledge that. And he showed good tools this season. But when I look at the ups and the downs and I pair them together, that's why I gave him a C on the season, just because I think he needs to be more consistently in the positive.
Yeah, I remember talking to Joey. It might have been like the first or second day of training camp. It might have even been OTAs. And I asked him, like, was the one thing you feel like you needed to clean up from last year the penalties? And he was like, no, I'm not really that worried about it. And I was like, okay. And then 12 more this year. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, he's the way he plays and the way they assign him to the most difficult receivers, like, he's going to give up catches. It almost doesn't bother me when he gives up catches. Like, it's fine. Go be aggressive. Go put your hands on him. Be big, be tough, do your thing, like go battle. And if you lose some of those battles, it's fine. Go put your helmet back. Ike Taylor used to give up lots of completions. He also shut down some of the best corners in the league, or best wide receivers in the league from time to time. Like, but the penalties, it's a problem. And they got to figure out something. 12 accepted, 15 called. No, more than that, 17 called. Like that's way too many. And I don't know what the adjustment is that they have to make, but there's got to be one.
Absolutely. Alan, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Those were our Stars and Skulls grades on the season for cornerback. Alan, let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now sites account, SteelersNow.com, and my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive. You can find the Steelers Now YouTube page or anywhere you find podcasts.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all the places. Same handle everywhere, at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.